14 months. That was how long I had been gone, and the whole flight home I pictured the same thing, an empty house with the power still on and the mail stacked behind the door. I came up the porch steps with my pack on one shoulder. The boards knew my weight. They always had. The door was unlocked. Inside, the kitchen smelled like white oak and fresh coffee, and the late afternoon light came through the window over the sink in long yellow bars, the way it used to when I was a kid. There was a woman standing at the table. Blonde, hair pulled into a long braid over one shoulder, a lavender blouse with the sleeves rolled. Her hand went flat against her chest when she saw me. Not a flinch, more like something she had been carrying got heavier all at once. On the table between us sat a bundle of old letters tied with a brown ribbon and a wooden picture frame turned toward the door. 2 women in the photograph. I did not know either one of them. I let the pack slide off my shoulder. It hit the tile with a sound I felt in my back teeth. Then I did what I was trained to do without deciding to. Corners, exits, hands. Her hands were empty except for a single envelope. No threat, just coffee and sunlight and a stranger standing in my grandmother's kitchen like she belonged there. She did not step back. She was not afraid of me. She looked straight at me and said, "Don't you recognize me?" I didn't. "My name is Garrett Shaw. I am 30 years old. At the time I am telling you about, I was a staff sergeant in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Campbell, which sits on the line between Kentucky and Tennessee and pours most of its people into a town called Clarksville. I have lived in Clarksville since I was 7. That was the year a car accident on a wet stretch of highway took both of my parents on the same afternoon. I do not remember much about the days after. I remember a hallway that smelled like floor wax, and a woman in a gray coat sitting down next to me on a plastic chair and saying nothing for a very long time. That was my grandmother, Helen Shaw, my father's mother, and the only family I had left. She had already raised one son and buried a husband, and nobody would have blamed her for saying it was too much. She did not say that. She drove me back to Clarksville in a car that smelled like peppermint and old vinyl, made up the back bedroom, and that was that. Helen was not a long conversation kind of woman. Her house was a single-story place with a wide covered porch across the front and a yard that sloped toward a line of hackberry trees. The porch boards creaked in 3 specific spots, and she never fixed them, because she said that was how she knew somebody was coming. The kitchen was the center of everything. That is where we ate, where I did my homework, where she taught me to fry an egg without breaking the yolk, and where she taught me the thing that actually stuck, how to sit next to a person in silence without needing to fill it. There is a burn mark on the counter beside the stove, the size of a quarter. I put it there at 12. The first time she let me use the gas range alone. She never sanded it out. She said a house should show its work. I enlisted at 21. I want to be honest about why, because people make it sound nobler than it was. It was not a flag on a wall or a speech. It was that after 14 years in a house with 2 people in it, and one of them getting older, the Army was the only thing I could find that had a shape to it. Somebody tells you where to stand. Somebody tells you when you got it right. For a kid who had spent his life waiting for the next thing to be taken away, that felt like a gift. I was good at it. I deployed 4 times. In between, I came home, sat on that porch, fixed whatever had gone wrong in the house, and let my grandmother feed me too much. In the spring of 2020, I met a woman named Megan Holt through friends from Post. Megan was in real estate. She was quick and funny, and she always knew what to say, in any room, to anybody, and I thought that was the thing I was missing. I thought if I stood close enough to somebody like that, some of it might come off on me. We were together almost 3 years, and it worked better than I let on, right up until it didn't. In early 2023, 2 weeks before my 4th deployment, Megan called and said she was done waiting. There was no fight, she said. I've done the math on the next 10 years, and I don't like the answer, and I said okay, because I had nothing to argue with. 3 years ended in under 9 minutes. I shipped out. That summer, while I was on the other side of the world, Ruth Dawson called. Ruth had lived next door since before I showed up. She was Helen's closest friend, a small, sharp woman in her 70s who could tell you the history of our street and exactly who deserved which part of it. She told me Helen was slowing down, her heart, mostly, nothing dramatic yet. She wanted me to hear it from her. I could not come home. That is the part I still turn over some nights. There is no version of that call where I get on a plane. Ruth told me not to worry, that somebody would be with her. I said thank you. I did not ask who. My grandmother died in late 2024. I found out standing in a plywood hallway with my company commander in front of me, and he did it kindly, and I said the words you say, and then I sat down on the edge of my bunk with my hands on my knees for about 20 minutes. I did not make it back for the funeral. Ruth handled it. I signed a power of attorney and sent it home so she could deal with the house, the utilities, all of it, and she never once made me feel like a burden. In early 2025, I got orders for one more deployment, 14 months. Before I left, I called Ruth and asked if she would keep an eye on the place, check the pipes in January, run the water, make sure nothing rotted. She said, "My niece will be staying there. Don't you worry about that house." I said okay. I did not ask her name. I was a man leaving for 14 months with a duffel bag by the door and a head full of other things. Here is the part I need you to hold on to, because it comes back. My grandmother wrote me letters. She had written through every deployment, in blue ink, on the same lined paper she used for grocery lists. In those last 2 years, they stopped arriving. I got maybe one for every 4 she said she sent. I figured it was the mail rotating post offices, a system that loses things for a living. I told her on a bad phone line, "Just keep writing them, Grandma. They'll catch up to me." They never caught up to me. It was not the post office. 14 months later, I walked through that unlocked door, and a woman in my kitchen asked if I recognized her. She saw my face, and she let it go. That is the first thing I want you to know about her. She had asked me a question that clearly mattered to her. She watched me come up empty, and she did not make me pay for it. "Claire," she said. "Claire Dawson. I'm Ruth's niece. Great niece, technically, which she corrected later. 28 years old. She had been living in my grandmother's house for 14 months, keeping the pipes from freezing and the gutters clear, exactly like Ruth had promised me on the phone the week before I flew out. You knew I was coming," I said. "Ruth got the date from your unit's family readiness group." She looked at the pack on the floor. "You're 2 days early. Flights moved. Then I owe you a bedroom." She said it lightly. She was already gathering the picture frame off the table, tucking it under her arm like she was embarrassed it had been out. I stopped her. "You said I should recognize you," and there it was again, that small pause where something crossed behind her eyes and then got put away. "This porch," she said. "Summer. About 10 years ago. My hair was a lot shorter and it wasn't blonde. I stood in my own kitchen and went digging. 10 years ago. I was 20, home for a few weeks before I signed the enlistment papers. There had been a girl next door at Ruth's for a couple of days visiting, I think, from somewhere north. Skinny. Brown hair cut short above the collar. She had come out onto our porch one evening because Ruth and Helen were inside doing something with a pie, and she had sat down on the second step, and I had sat down on the third, and we stayed there until the streetlight came on. She had told me her mother died that spring, and I had said, without thinking, "How's your mom doing?" I heard it come out of my mouth. I heard exactly what I had done, and instead of scrambling to fix it, instead of apologizing, I just sat there. I could not think of a single thing that would help, so I let the silence sit, and I did not leave. And eventually she said something about the crickets, and we talked about nothing for another hour. That was the whole memory. That was all of it. A girl on a step, 10 years ago, whose name I had not held on to. "You were reading a paperback with the cover torn off," I said. Claire's hand came down flat on the counter. She looked at it like it had moved on its own. "Yes," she said. "I was." She moved out that same afternoon, carried 2 bags across the yard to Ruth's back door, and that was that. And I stood in my grandmother's kitchen alone for the first time in 14 months and did not know what to do with my hands. She was back the next morning at 8 with a toolbox. "The gutter on the north side is packed," she said. "It's been backing up onto the sill. If it sits another winter, you'll be replacing the trim." I told her I would get to it. She said she was already dressed for it. Then she put a ladder against my house and went up it while I stood there holding a cup of coffee like a guest. That was how it started, and I want to lay it out plainly, because looking back it is almost comical how obvious it was and how completely I missed it. Monday, it was the gutter. Tuesday, she came over because Ruth had made too much chicken and dumplings and it would go bad. Wednesday, it was the hinge on the back door, which she oiled without asking. Thursday, she was in the side yard at 7 in the morning with a watering can, and when I came out she said, "Your grandmother put mint in here. I've been watering it every day for 2 years. My hands do it before I'm awake." Friday, there was no reason at all. She just showed up with 2 coffees and said the light was better on my porch. The next week, it was the storm door that would not latch. The week after that, it was a wasp nest under the eave, which she pointed out and then absolutely refused to let me handle at dusk without a light, standing at the bottom of the ladder holding the flashlight steady on the spot until I was done. Somewhere in there, she started knowing where things were in my house before I did. She would say, "The good screwdriver's in the drawer under the phone," and she would be right, because my grandmother had kept it there for 30 years and I had forgotten and Claire had not. Every single day there was a small reason, and every single one of them was true, and not one of them was the reason. You have probably figured that out already. I did not. I was a man who had been handed a house full of his dead grandmother's furniture and told to live in it, and I was moving through my days the way you move through waist-deep water. I saw a kind, quiet neighbor who was good with a screwdriver. That is honestly all I saw. Meanwhile, the letters sat on the shelf above the coffee maker. They had been there since the day I got back. That bundle, that brown ribbon. Ruth told me the second week that Helen had left them out on the kitchen table for me, and Claire had moved them to the shelf so the sun would not fade the ink. One evening, Claire was drying a pan, and she nodded at them and said, "Are you going to read those?" "Those are my grandmother's letters," I said. "I'm not ready." The dish towel stopped moving. Not for long. Maybe 2 seconds. Then her hand came down flat on the counter again, the same way it had the first day, and she said, "Okay," and went back to the pan. I noticed the pause. I did not understand the pause. I understand it now, and this is where I have to step out of the order of things and tell you what I did not learn until later, because otherwise none of the rest of it will land the way it should. In the summer of 2023, Ruth called Claire in Nashville, where she was working as a freelance bookkeeper out of a rented apartment. Claire had nobody left either. Her mother had died when she was 18, and Ruth was the last of her people. Ruth said Helen next door was failing and there was no family to do it, and Claire packed a car and came. She stayed 14 months. She took my grandmother's blood pressure in the morning and wrote the numbers on an index card taped inside the cabinet door. She learned which pharmacy had the shorter line. She cooked things soft enough to be easy and salted them enough to still be worth eating. And in the evenings, she sat in the wing chair by the lamp and read out loud, because Helen's eyes had gotten bad, and Helen would rather have died than admit it. And Helen talked about me. Constantly. She dragged out the photo albums. She told Claire about the burn mark on the counter and the porch boards she refused to fix. She told her about a 7-year-old who did not speak for most of a summer. She told her how, every single time I came home on leave, before I said hello to anybody, I would walk the house looking for what had broken while I was gone and fix it, and then act like it had always been that way. There is a particular kind of intimacy in that, and I did not appreciate it until much later. Claire spent 14 months hearing me described by the one person on earth who had watched me the longest and had no reason to flatter me. She heard the good, and she heard the rest of it. She heard about the temper I had at 15 and the year I would not answer the phone. She got a full accounting, and then, one night, about a year in, my grandmother reached into the drawer of the side table and put a bundle of letters in Claire's lap. "I wrote these for my grandson," she said. "The mail keeps eating them. Read them. Then you'll know who he is." Claire told me later that she said no twice, and that Helen looked at her the way Helen looked at people when the conversation was over. So she read them. She read 2 years of a woman's ordinary days written to a man 10,000 miles away. And somewhere in there she stopped being a woman doing a kindness for her aunt and started being something else, and she knew it, and she never said one word about it to a living soul. She told me once what the line was that did it. It was in a letter from that October. Helen wrote, "The Dawson girl came again today. She stops at your picture in the hall and looks at it a while and then makes herself walk on. I know that look. I used to do it to your grandfather's photograph after he passed, and I always turned away fast so nobody would catch me at it. My grandmother saw it. She wrote it down in a letter to me, and then she did not send that one either. So, when I stood in that kitchen and said, 'I'm not ready,' what Claire heard was a man refusing to open the only place where she had ever admitted how she felt, and she could not say a word, because saying it would mean telling me she had read them first. Instead, she said, 'Okay,' and she picked up the next pan. There is one more thing about those weeks. Megan, for almost 3 years, had wanted me to open up. She said it kindly at first, and then less kindly. She would ask what I was thinking, and I would say nothing, because it was true, and she would take it as a door being shut. She wanted a version of me that talked more, and I do not blame her for wanting it. I could not build him. Claire never asked me a single question like that. She would come over at 7 in the evening and sit across the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she did not need, and we would go 20 minutes without either of us saying anything, and she would look perfectly content. The window fan would turn. The mint would come in off the side yard whenever the air moved. I remember thinking, in a dull, unexamined way, "This is easy. This is the easiest thing in my life right now." That should have been the tell. When you have spent your whole life bracing, the absence of bracing is information. But I was not reading anything that summer. I was a man unpacking a duffel bag, 1 item a week, sleeping in the back bedroom I had slept in at 7, waking up at 4 in the morning out of habit, and standing in the dark kitchen listening to a house that had somebody else's routines worn into it. I did not once ask myself why a 28-year-old woman was spending her evenings in silence with a man she barely knew. 6 weeks after I got home, on a Saturday morning, a white sedan pulled into my driveway and stopped on the gravel with that particular sound. Gravel makes when somebody parks, like they have already decided how the conversation is going to go. Megan Holt got out. She looked good. She always looked good. Brown hair cut sharp at the jaw, sunglasses pushed up, a folder under one arm out of pure habit. 3 years had not touched her. "I heard you were back," she said. "Nobody tells me anything anymore." I was on the porch with a wrench in my hand and half the screen door apart on the floorboards. "Megan, can I sit?" She sat. She talked for a while about people we both knew, and a house she had sold on Madison Street, and how the town was changing. And then she stopped and looked at the yard and said the thing she had driven over to say. I was wrong. About how I ended it. I did not answer. I did the math, and I got the math right, and I still got the answer wrong, she said. I thought I was choosing a life. I was just choosing the easier next 12 months. She turned toward me. "I've been thinking about it for 2 years, Garrett. I want to try again." I set the wrench down on the boards. I remember the sound of it. "Megan, it's been 3 years. 3 years doesn't erase the 3 before it. And here is the honest part. Some piece of me was not immune to that. I was 30 years old, back from a 14-month deployment, living in a dead woman's house with her curtains still up. Somebody I had loved was sitting on my porch saying she had been wrong. That lands on a man. What I said out loud was that I was not in a place to be thinking about any of it, which was true, and which she took as a door left open, which it probably was. "That's fair," she said. "I'm not asking for an answer today." Then she looked past me at the house, the porch, the roofline, the yard sloping down toward the hackberry trees, and she said, "You know, she kept it up beautifully, right to the end." I did not think anything of that at the time either. Then the side gate creaked, and Claire came around the corner of the house with a spade in one hand and dirt to the wrist, because it was Saturday, and Saturday was the mint bed, and she stopped when she saw there was company. "Sorry," she said. "I'll come back." "You don't have to." "I'll come back." And she went. Megan watched the whole thing over the top of her sunglasses. "Who's that?" "Ruth's niece. She's been keeping the house up while I was gone." "Huh?" Megan said. And then she smiled and asked about the screen door, and we did not talk about it again that morning. 4 days later, she came back without calling. Claire was up on a step stool at the kitchen window with a brush, painting the frame, because 2 winters of that backed-up gutter had cost the sill some paint, and she had decided this was the weekend. The whole kitchen smelled like fresh latex and cut grass through the open window. Megan let herself in through the front. She had lived in that house on and off for the better part of 3 years, and she still moved through it like it was hers. "Oh, you're painting," she said. "That's so nice of you." "It needed it," Claire said, and kept painting. What followed, I did not have the sense to recognize at the time. It sounded like small talk. It was not small talk, it was a survey. How long had she been staying here? 14 months, more or less. Where before that? Nashville. And what was it she did again? Bookkeeping, mostly small contractors, all remote. And how did she know Garrett? Claire's brush kept going. I knew his grandmother. Right, Helen, of course. Such a sweet lady. Megan leaned against the counter, arms folded, easy as anything. "You must have been close, if she had you living here." "I was her caregiver," Claire said, "for a little over a year. Paid? For part of it. And after she passed, you just stayed." "Ruth asked me to," Claire said. "Somebody had to run the water. I was standing right there in the doorway with a bag of ice in my hand, and I heard every word of it, and my read on the room was 2 women being polite. That is how badly I was paying attention. Because listen to what actually got collected in 4 minutes. 14 months in the house, no family tie, handles other people's books for a living, was paid for part of the work and not for the rest of it. Had no reason to stay after the funeral except an old woman next door asking her to. Every one of those is a fact. Every one of them is also a brick, if you are the kind of person who builds with them. The difference between them was the whole story, if I had known how to look." Megan filled the kitchen. She moved things while she talked, turned the salt shaker, straightened a towel, opened a cabinet, and shut it. Claire painted a window frame. Somebody asked her a question. She answered it in 8 words or less and went back to what she was doing. Megan left after 20 minutes. She stopped in the doorway on her way out and looked at the shelf above the coffee maker for about 2 seconds longer than a person looks at a shelf. She called me the next night. "Garrett, I need to ask you something and I need you not to get defensive." "Okay, have you read your grandmother's letters?" I sat down. "How do you know about the letters?" "They're sitting on your shelf in a brown ribbon. Helen had them out on the table for a year before she died, and everybody on that street knew what they were." A pause. "Have you read them?" "Not yet." "Then how do you explain the knot?" I did not say anything. Helen tied everything the same way. That looped bow, doubled back, with the tail tucked under. She did it on presents. She did it on the twine on her tomato steaks. She did it every single time, and I watched her do it for 3 years. Megan's voice was very level. "That bundle on your shelf is tied in a granny knot with the ends pulled straight. That is not your grandmother's knot. Somebody untied those letters, Garrett, and it wasn't you, and it wasn't Helen. Because Helen is dead." I stood in the kitchen with the phone against my ear and looked at the shelf. She was right. I had held that bundle in my hands. The ribbon was tied wrong. It had never once occurred to me to wonder about it. She read them, Megan said. Your grandmother's private letters. Letters written to you that you have not read yet, that a stranger read first and then put back and retied and left on a shelf for you to find. Do you not hear how that sounds? A woman with no connection to your family moves into your house, reads your family's private mail, and is still there 14 months later. She was Helen's caregiver. I'm sure she was. I'm sure she was wonderful. The Army put $400 million into Fort Campbell in the last 6 years. Land on your street has tripled. Tripled, Garrett. Every wholesaler in Montgomery County has that block mapped. A beat. I'm not saying she's calculating. I'm saying she is a bookkeeper who has had 14 months alone in a house she does not own, with the deceased owner's personal papers, and you got home 6 weeks ago, and she has not missed a single day. I want to be careful about how I describe what that did to me, because it would be easy now to make myself sound better than I was. Here is what made it work. It was not a lie. That is what I did not understand about people like Megan until that night. The dangerous thing is not the lie. The dangerous thing is a true fact set down at exactly the right angle. Claire had read those letters. That part was real, and I could confirm it in 90 seconds, and everything Megan wrapped around it borrowed its weight from that one true thing. I did not sleep much. I lay in the back bedroom and ran it the way you run a bad map, over and over, looking for the road you missed. 14 months alone in a house that was not hers. 2 years of watering a mint bed for a woman who was dead. Every day for 6 weeks with a small reason in her hand. There were 2 ways to read all of that, and both of them fit the same evidence. And around 3 in the morning I understood that I could not tell which one I was looking at. That is a bad feeling for a man who has built an entire adult life on being able to assess a room. In the morning, Claire came over at 8 with 2 coffees, and I let her get all the way to the table before I said it. Did you read my grandmother's letters? She set the cups down. She did not sit. Yes. I waited. I gave her the whole room to fill. She gave them to me, Claire said. Helen put them in my lap and asked me to. When? About a year in. The fall, before she passed. Why? And this is the moment. This is the one I would take back if I got to take one back, because she opened her mouth to answer me, and then she looked at my face, at whatever was on my face, after a night of not sleeping, and she closed it again. Because she wanted somebody to, Claire said. That's all. It was not all. She knew it was not all. She had a real answer, and she chose not to spend it in a kitchen at 8 in the morning on a man who was looking at her like that. Helen's gone, I said. I know. So there's nobody who can tell me that's true. Claire took that. She stood there and took it, and her fingers went flat on the counter the way they always did, and she held very still for about 3 seconds. No, she said, there isn't. She did not defend herself. She did not list the 14 months. She did not tell me about the index card in the cabinet, or the reading out loud, or the pharmacy runs. Everything she could have said, she had earned the right to say, and she said none of it. I'll get my things out of the back room, she said. There's not much. I did not stop her. I want that on the record, because I have thought about it a great deal since. I did not accuse her of anything, and I did not ask her to leave. I just did not stop her, which is its own answer. And she was too smart not to hear it. She left at 6 that evening. 2 bags again, across the same yard, the same as the first day. Ruth's porch light was on for her. I watched from the kitchen window like a coward, and did not go out. She did not come back the next morning. I got up at 4 out of habit, the way I always did, and stood in the dark kitchen, and there was no smell of coffee in it. First time in 6 weeks, just cold paint on the window frame and mint coming in off the side yard, where somebody had watered it every single morning for 2 years without being asked. I sat down at the table by myself with one lamp on. The chair across from me was pushed in. I had gotten used to it being pulled out. The letters were on the shelf. Brown ribbon, wrong knot. I got up and took them down and held them in both hands, and I sat there with them in front of me for a very long time, and I did not open them yet. I untied the ribbon a little after 10 that night and read every letter my grandmother ever wrote me. There were 31 of them. Blue ink on lined paper, her handwriting getting bigger and looser as the dates went on, which is a thing I noticed and then had to set down for a minute before I could keep going. They were not profound. I want to say that because people hear letters from a dying woman and expect wisdom. Helen did not do wisdom. She reported. The faucet in the hall bath had developed a drip, and the plumber wanted $90 to look at it, which she considered robbery. The Pruitt's orange cat had figured out how to get in the bathroom window, and she had stopped fighting it. The mint had gotten out of its bed again and was headed for the tomatoes, and she had decided to let it win. The church had changed the hymnal, and she had opinions. There was a whole page, an entire page, about a bad batch of coffee she had bought on sale. That was my grandmother. That was her exact voice, right there in my hands, and I had not heard it in 2 years. I read 4 of them before I understood that I had stopped hearing my own voice in my head reading them and started hearing hers, and I had to get up and stand at the sink for a minute with the water running before I could sit back down. The paper had gone soft at the folds. Somebody had opened and refolded them enough times to wear the creases smooth, and it was not me. And then, about the 8th letter in, a name. The Dawson girl comes over most days now. Ruth sent her. She is quiet, which you would like. The 11th letter. Claire brought soup and stayed to eat it so I would eat mine. The 15th. Claire reads to me in the evenings. Her voice is small, so I have to move the good chair over close, which she has not once complained about. The 19th. Claire fixed the latch on the storm door. I did not ask her to. She just did it, and did not mention it. And I thought, well, isn't that something? By the 20th letter, she was in almost every one, and my grandmother had stopped calling her the Dawson girl. Claire asked me what you were like at 7. I told her the truth, which is that you didn't talk for a whole summer and I let you not talk. Claire took me to the pharmacy and then to the cemetery, and she waited in the car for 40 minutes without once looking at her phone. I told Claire about the counter burn. She laughed for a long time. It's good to hear laughing in this kitchen. And then, in the letter dated that October, the one I had been half expecting since the 8th page and still was not ready for, the Dawson girl came again today. She stops at your picture in the hall and looks at it a while and then makes herself walk on. I know that look. I used to do it to your grandfather's photograph after he passed, and I always turned away fast so nobody would catch me at it. And 2 letters later, near the end, in handwriting that had gotten hard to read. Garrett, I would like for you to meet this one. That's all I'll say about it. You'll do what you do. I put the pages down on the table and squared the edges, and I sat back in the chair, and I put my hands flat on the wood. A stranger had not moved into my house. My grandmother had spent the last year of her life auditioning somebody for me, and then died before she could finish the sentence. She had written it all down, 31 times, and then not mailed a single one of the last ones. And I had spent 2 years blaming a post office. I understood something else too, sitting there at 4 in the morning. She had handed those letters to Claire on purpose, not because the mail failed, because she was running out of time and she wanted the story in a pair of hands that would still be standing in that kitchen when I got back. She could not introduce us. She knew that. She was not going to last long enough to do it the ordinary way, over a Sunday table, with a pot roast and too many questions. So she did the only thing left to a woman in that position. She wrote me down honestly, 31 times, and put it where the right person would find it, and then she trusted the 2 of us to be slow enough to get there eventually. That is a hell of a thing to realize about somebody who is already buried. I went next door at 7. There was still dew on Ruth's grass, and the light was coming in low and gray gold under the trees. Claire was sitting on the 2nd step of the porch with a mug, in a sweatshirt, hair not braided yet. 2nd step. Same as 10 years ago. I did not say anything. I sat down on the third step, which is where I had sat then, and I do not think either of us planned that. We stayed there a while. A truck went by. Somebody 2 houses down started a mower and then thought better of it. You read them, she said. Not a question. All of them. She nodded slowly and turned the mug around in her hands. And then she told me. Not in a speech, in pieces, with long gaps in between, the way you take something out of a box you have not opened in a while. I recognized you the second you came through that door, she said. I've known your face for 2 years off a wall. But that's not, she stopped, started again. That night on your porch, 10 years ago, my mom had been gone 4 months and everybody I knew had a script for it. They'd get this look, and then they'd say the thing, and then they'd change the subject as fast as they could. Every single person, and I asked how she was doing. You asked how she was doing. Something almost like a laugh. And then you heard yourself. And you didn't apologize. And you didn't explain. And you didn't get up. You just sat there and let it be awful with me. For about 10 minutes, and then we talked about crickets. She looked at the yard. I was 18. Nobody had ever done that. Nobody has done it since. I did not know what to say to that, so I did what I do, which is nothing, which apparently is the thing. It reorganized something in me, hearing it. For 10 years I had carried that evening as a small private failure the night I said the worst possible sentence to a grieving girl and was too stupid to fix it. She had carried the same 10 minutes as the only time anybody had stayed. Same porch, same crickets. 2 completely different stories, running in parallel, for a decade. When Ruth called me in Nashville, Claire said, I came because it was Ruth. That's the truth. That is exactly why I came. She turned the mug again, and then Helen started talking about you, every day for a year. And then she put those letters in my lap and told me to read them so I'd know who you were. And I said no, twice. She doesn't take no. She does not take no. Claire was quiet for a second. So I read them, and after that I wasn't staying for Ruth anymore. I stayed the last stretch for a man who was 10,000 miles away and didn't know my name, and I knew exactly how that sounded, which is why I never said it out loud to one single person on this earth. 14 months, I said. 14 months. And then you came home 2 days early, and I hadn't figured out how to be a normal person about it yet, and the first thing out of my mouth was the stupidest possible question. She shook her head at the porch boards. Don't you recognize me? Like you owed me that. And then she said the part I think about the most. Every day I came over here I had a reason in my hand. The gutter, the dumplings, the hinge. I needed one, because if I showed up without one you might ask why I was there, and I did not have an answer I was willing to say out loud. I sat with that. 6 weeks of small, true reasons, every one of them a door I never once looked behind. I did not tell her I loved her. I want to be honest about that too. I was not there yet, and she would have known if I had faked it, and she deserved better than a man performing a feeling to make up for a bad morning. What I said was this. My grandmother wrote 31 letters to me and mailed almost none of them. She gave them to you instead. I looked at her until she looked back. I think she knew you'd outlast the post office. Claire put her hand flat on the step beside her. Megan called at 4 that afternoon, the way I knew she would, and asked how I was doing in a voice that already had the answer picked out. I did not make it a fight. She had not done anything I could take to a court or a preacher. She had told me a true thing at the exact angle that would do the most damage, and she had done it because she wanted something, and I understood that. Megan, I said, she's here because of my grandmother. You're not. There was a long pause on the line. That's not fair, she said. It's not, I said. It's just true. She said something short and she hung up, and that was the end of it. She did not come back. I saw her car in town twice that fall, and neither of us waved, and there was no hard feeling in it. Some things just finish. That night I did one more thing, and it was the only thing I did in that whole stretch that I am actually proud of. Claire had taken the wooden picture frame with her when she moved out, the one that had been on the table the day I walked in, her mother and her, standing close, both of them smiling, in a kitchen I did not recognize. She had taken it down and packed it and never mentioned it. Ruth let me in the back door and did not ask a single question, which is how I knew she had been waiting for this for 6 weeks. The frame was in a box by the door of the room Claire was staying in. I took it home and I put it on the shelf in my kitchen, next to the photograph of my grandmother standing in front of this house in 1986. 2 frames, same shelf, same height. Claire came over the next morning at 8 with 2 coffees and stopped in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the shelf for a long moment. She did not say one word about it. She set the cups on the table and put her hand flat on the counter and left it there, and neither of us said anything at all, and the window fan turned, and the mint came in off the side yard. After that morning, Claire came back. She stopped bringing reasons. She just came. She would knock twice on the frame of the back door out of politeness and let herself in, and if I asked what she was up to, she would say nothing and mean it, and that was the whole exchange. No gutter, no dumplings, no hinge. Somewhere in there, the second coffee cup started. She had a key, because she had been living in the house for over a year, and I never asked for it back, and some mornings she was in the kitchen before I was up. I would come down the hall at 6, and there would be 2 cups on the table, one of them mine, hers already half gone because she is an early riser, and I am a man who gets up at 4 and then lies there until 6, pretending he isn't awake. Then one morning I got up first, and I made 2. Neither of us said a single word about it. Not that morning, not ever. That is not a thing we discussed. It was just the arrangement now. The way the porch boards creaked in 3 specific spots. That was the summer I put the house back together. I pulled the bad boards off the porch and replaced them, which took 4 weekends because I kept finding more that were soft underneath. I scraped and repainted the front of the house, and then the side, and then gave up on the back until spring. I rebuilt the mint bed with proper edging, since it had been staging an invasion of the tomatoes for 6 years, and my grandmother's official position had been surrender. Claire worked next to me for most of it. She was better at the fine work than I was. She had a steadier hand for trim and cut lines, and I was better at anything that involved a pry bar. We figured out fast who did what, and after that, we barely talked while we worked. She would hold the end of a board without being asked. I would have the caulk gun in my hand and reach over, and she would already be putting it there. I have been on teams my entire adult life. Fire teams, squads, whole platoons. There is a specific thing that happens when 2 people stop having to narrate what they are doing, and it does not happen because you like each other. It happens because you have both decided to pay attention. That is all it ever is. I had it with her over a can of paint in July. I did apologize, by the way. Once, badly, in the middle of the second weekend of porch boards, with a pry bar still in my hand. I told her I should have stood in that kitchen and said out loud that 14 months of somebody's life is evidence, and I did not say it, and I had no excuse. She let me finish. Then she said, "You'd been home 6 weeks, and somebody told you the one true thing that made the rest of it fit." I'd have wondered too. She picked up the end of the next board. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm also not going to make you carry it around. Pick up your end." That is the entire conversation. That was the whole reckoning. I have known men who would have gotten 6 months out of that material. Ruth watched the whole production from her porch across the yard, in a lawn chair, with iced tea, like a woman who had bought a ticket. She said exactly one thing to me about any of it, the entire summer. I was carrying a bundle of scrap boards out to the truck, and she called over the fence, "Helen knew before you did." "Ma'am?" I said, and set the boards down. Ruth took a drink of her tea. She always knew first. 60 years, that woman. Never once had the decency to be wrong about a person. and she went back to her crossword and would not say another word. The evening it turned was in September, and nothing happened in it. That is the honest report. Nothing happened. I was at the kitchen table with my grandmother's letters, reading through them again the way I had started doing about once a week, and Claire was across from me with a library paperback and her feet up on the third chair. The lamp was on. The window was open. We sat there for something close to an hour, and neither of us said one word. When she got up to go, she rinsed her cup and set it in the rack and got as far as the door. And I heard myself say, "You don't have to go home every night." She stopped with her hand on the frame. Then she did the thing she does when she is thinking, which I had noticed by then and had never mentioned to her. She tapped the side of her finger against the door frame, twice, slow. "Not yet," she said. "Okay, but soon." And she pulled the door shut behind her. I want to be clear that she was right. I was 2 months out from a night where I let somebody hand me a true fact at a bad angle, and I did not defend her. Whatever came next had to be built on something sturdier than an apology and a picture frame. She knew it, and I knew it, and neither of us said so. 4 months later I left the army. There was no ceremony to it. My contract ran out in January, and I did not re-enlist. My first sergeant asked twice, and then stopped asking, and shook my hand, and told me to come by if I ever wanted to talk about anything, which is the closest thing to a benediction you get. I want to be careful how I explain this part, because it is easy to make it sound like a woman talked me out of a career. She did not. She never once asked. She would not have. The truth is simpler. For 9 years the army had been the only structure I could find. Then I came home to a house with a mint bed in the side yard and a burn mark on the counter, and somebody sitting across the table from me at 7 in the evening with nothing to say, and I discovered I had built a different structure without noticing, and it was already load-bearing. I took a maintenance job at one of the high schools in town. Boilers, HVAC, doors that stick, ballasts, the sidewalk in front that heaves every February. It is quiet work, and I am good at it, and I am home by 4:30 every day of my life. There are people who would call that a step down from staff sergeant. Those people have never come home at 4:30 every day. The first week, I kept waiting for the drop. 9 years of a job where somebody eventually tells you where to be next, and now nobody was going to. I stood in a boiler room in February with a clipboard and had a full minute of not knowing what to do with myself. Then I fixed the boiler. Then I went home, and there were 2 cups on the table, and one of them was still warm. Claire had her own thing going by then. She had built her bookkeeping clients back up to where she needed real space instead of a laptop on her knees. So she set up an office in the front room at Ruth's, a proper desk, 2 monitors, a filing cabinet, a nameplate she thought was ridiculous and kept anyway. The window over that desk looked straight across the yard at my porch. I asked her once if she picked that room for the light. "No," she said, and did not elaborate, and went back to her spreadsheet. We started actually going places, which after that summer felt almost formal. Dinner in town on Fridays. A drive up to land between the lakes on a Saturday with a cooler in the back. Nobody in Clarksville was surprised. Nobody in Clarksville was ever surprised Ruth had it settled with the neighborhood months before we had it settled with each other, and by the time we told anybody, the correct response had already been agreed upon, which was, well, obviously, that spring Claire moved into the house. Officially, with a truck and boxes and a whole day of it. And Ruth stood in the driveway, supervising like a foreman, and did not carry one single item. Claire took Helen's curtains down that same week and washed them and put them back up, which I had not been able to make myself do in a year and a half, and which she did without once turning it into a moment. She put the photograph of her mother back on the kitchen shelf herself, right where I had put it, next to Helen's. A year after that, on a Saturday evening in May, I asked her to marry me on the porch. I did not do it in a restaurant, and I did not do it anywhere with an audience. I did it on the steps, on those exact boards, new ones now, cut and set by hand, and they still creak, because I put them back the way she had them. second step and third step, 10 years and change from the first time. The street light came on partway through, right on schedule, the same as it had that night, and I do not think either of us mentioned it. I did not lead with a ring. What I brought out was the letters. They live in a glass front box now, one my grandfather made a long time ago for something else entirely, which Helen had used to keep buttons in. 31 letters. Brown ribbon, sitting behind glass on the mantel. I brought the box out and set it on the step between us. "She wrote all of these to me," I said. "And then she handed them to you." I put my hand on the top of the box. "I've been thinking about it for 2 years now, and I don't think she was writing them to me at all at the end. I think she was writing them to whoever was going to be sitting on this porch after she was gone." Claire looked at the box a long time. Then she reached over and tapped the glass with the side of her finger. Twice, slow, and she said yes. The box went back on the mantel that night, beside the 2 photographs, and that is where all 3 of them still are. My grandmother in front of this house in 1986, Claire and her mother in a kitchen in Nashville, and 31 letters behind glass with a brown ribbon around them. In the evening, the light comes across the yard from the west, through the kitchen door, and it lands on that shelf for about 20 minutes before it goes. The new porch boards creak in 3 spots, which are not the same 3 spots, and I have decided that is how the house knows time is passing. The mint has taken the tomato bed completely. I let it. My grandmother would say I was raised right. I walked through that door expecting an empty house. That is what I had braced for the whole way home. Cold rooms, a stopped clock, somebody else's dust on my grandmother's furniture. Instead, there was coffee on the stove and afternoon light on the floor, and a woman standing at the table who asked me if I recognized her. I did not. I have gone over it 100 times since, and I have stopped trying to feel worse about it. It had been 10 years. She had changed her hair and grown into her face and lived an entire life I knew nothing about. There is no version of me that recognizes her in that kitchen, but my grandmother did. Helen recognized her the first month, at a kitchen table, from a woman's face when she passed a photograph in a hallway. She saw it and she wrote it down, and then she did not mail the letter. She did not mail any of the important ones. She held them back, all 31, and put them into the hands of the person she wanted reading them first, and then she ran out of time and trusted the 2 of us to be slow about it in the right direction. I used to think that was luck. I do not anymore. That was a woman doing the last useful thing she had left in her. Here is what I actually learned, and it is not complicated. Some people wait their entire lives for somebody to sit down next to them and not need anything. No script, no fixing, no changing the subject to something more comfortable. Just a person who stays put while it is awful. Claire waited 10 years on that, off 10 minutes on a porch step from a 20-year-old who was too stupid to know he had done anything at all. And when she finally got close to it again, she still could not say it out loud. So she carried a gutter, and a hinge, and a watering can, and a pot of somebody else's chicken and dumplings, every single day for 6 weeks. Small, true reasons stacked in front of the real one. I have been to 4 countries in a uniform. I have flown home from 3 continents, but the only trip that ever changed anything was the one where I walked into my own kitchen and did not recognize the person standing in it. The letters are still in the glass box on the mantel, with the brown ribbon around them, and I have never once retied that ribbon the way my grandmother tied it, the looped bow. Doubled back, tail tucked under. I leave it the way Claire ties it. That knot is the knot of this house now. So, let me ask you 2 things, and I would like an honest answer. If somebody waited 10 years for you and never said a word about it, would you want to know? Or is there a part of you that would rather they kept it to themselves? And do you believe the people we have lost can still put 2 strangers in the same room on purpose? Because I know what I believe. And I know exactly which shelf it is sitting on. If this story made you think of somebody, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so the next one finds you. And do me a favor and tell me down in the comments, Have you ever completely failed to recognize the most important thing in your life while it was standing right in front of you? I did, for 6 weeks. In my own kitchen, I got lucky. She was patient,